What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 82 of the Book Binge, where this week we are covering, as I mentioned in last week's review, a somewhat controversial, or maybe not controversial so much as polarizing classic, one that I think many people have been forced to read in their lives and have subsequently hated. Whether or not that hate was because they were forced to read it or because they actually didn't like it, who's to say? The thing is, this book is, if it's because people hated it, I can totally see why. That is Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. This book, I think at the time that I'm recording this video, it's been a couple months since I finished reading it. And I think in those couple months, I have soured on this book a little bit more than I did even in those 1 or 2 days before I did the written review for it. But nearly all of that comes down, I think, to my having binged the absolute heck out of this book while I was reading it in, what was it, very late February. I finished it in like the first couple days of March, I want to say, was the approximate time period that happened. But we'll talk a little bit more about all of that kind of stuff just a little bit later. First, I want to talk about the things that I loved about Wuthering Heights, specifically the things that I still love about Wuthering Heights, even though I have soured on a couple more things, since then. First off, obviously, this is going to be something that Wuthering Heights shares with the Frankenstein review, in the sense that there's lots of stuff that I enjoyed, lots of stuff to like, lots of stuff that, or a couple of things that maybe I didn't enjoy, lots of stuff that there is to dislike, specifically like on a more objective level. But the thing that I don't think anybody who is going to read this book that is going to disagree with is that this book has insane depth of tone for the gothic fiction that it is, trying to be, essentially. Like, that's also shares with Frankenstein, just in the sense that they are both gothic. The atmosphere is fantastic. Now, there may be people who don't enjoy gothic tone or gothic atmosphere. That's fine. But I don't think anybody's going to disagree that the tone was done very fully. Like, the weakness of the tone is not going to be a problem with the book. It's just whether you jive with that tone or not, if that makes any sense. It makes the book very addicting to read, and that's why I ended up blazing through it so quick. One of the other things that is really good about it is that the characters are great, if not entirely likable. In fact, pretty much all of these characters are unlikable, if not just straight up terrible. Like, these characters are, a lot of these characters are just god-awful people. They're terrible, like, hate them. But they are written very well. The confrontations and the arguments between them, especially, is very good. That's all wonderful, especially for the first 2/3 of the book, until the drama starts to wear you down a little bit. But speaking about the drama, there's a sort of back and forth sort of rivalry between houses and families, if you will, that goes on throughout essentially the entirety of this book, even through multiple generations of characters, so to speak. And the way this rivalry evolves over time with those characters and with the changings of the families and with the changings of not the changings of the locale specifically, but kind of when the scenery changes from one place to another and then back again at different points in the story. It was almost always super fun and engaging. And where this is involved, where the family stuff is involved. The family tree thing, let's just say that whatever it's called, is it called the genealogical table? It might be called the genealogical table. Yeah. The genealogical table is an absolute lifesaver. I suppose, like, different people who've read the book might say that it is a spoiler, and I suppose it kind of is, so I guess I'm not going to show it. Because really it is spoilers for several different events that occur throughout the story. But if you want any sense of when certain things are going on, the genealogical table is a lifesaver for that, so that's a little bit less confusing. But I just thought it was more enjoyable for me to theorize about what was going to happen anyway, knowing certain characters end up together, or certain characters are going to die when, or, certain things like that, knowing the dates, essentially, since the book never tells you dates. Like, there are twice in the book, I believe, when the story actually gives you a date. Otherwise, you have to infer based off the events and the genealogical table. You're able to put things together really well if you use the table for following the timeline, which of course you don't have to do. I actually recommend doing it because it makes the book less confusing than it already is, because quite frankly, even though there's not a whole lot of characters or a whole lot of things going on, the book can be quite confusing. That's, I suppose that should be in the bad, but I just enjoyed all the family drama stuff, let's say. So that's basically the thing that makes this end up in the good in the first place. The main thing that I enjoyed, though, is that there were tons of elements of the story that kind of hit me in the feels because of how they were written and the way that they were weirdly similar to my own experience with a first love, especially with the age of the characters in question. There are going to be certain events that happen with a couple of the characters just in the way that their love story, their interactions were developed, the way that their families react, the way that certain things like that go on that are like really, really similar to how my own my own high school love story, for example, went, and that felt like really kind of weird to have that happen when I read it. But since I've already kind of gone into a couple of the more bad things about Wuthering Heights, let's talk about the bad. The first couple chapters are super, super, super confusing, like really, really, really random, and like, what in the world is even happening here? And like, it's impossible to decipher those for those first couple chapters until you reread them later. Like, I actually got until about chapter 7 or 8, and then once I finally had an idea of who the characters were and what their relations were to each other at that point in the story, I was like, okay, I'm going to go back and read those first 2 chapters again. And I did, and they made infinitely more sense. Like, if you read chapters 1 and 2 of Wuthering Heights and you do not know what you just read, I don't think you're supposed to. It seems like that was the intention because, man, they are confusing. One of the things that I think I disliked about the entire book as a whole is that a particular character, Joseph, his dialogue is nigh on unreadable. It is terrible. I don't care how good of a Yorkshire accent it is. I don't care how accurate it is to how people with that accent actually speak. I do not care at all, not even a little bit in the slightest. His dialogue is dang near unreadable, and it got to the point where even before halfway, I was maybe a third of the way through the story, where every single time if that character came into the scene and he ended up starting talking, I just skipped the entire paragraph and would, infer what it was he said based off of how the other characters react, based off of how the other characters speak back, based off of those elements of the conversation. I would just skip everything that Joseph said. Because, well, frankly, he would speak in paragraphs as well. 90% of the time, anything he said, if he spoke 5 sentences, it could be summarized in 3 words. Pretty much is how he spoke. And it was so unreadable. It was terrible. So, like, I do not, like, I understand why they decided to go back to having Joseph's Yorkshire accent in there instead of using the version of it when it wasn't unreadable. But the thing is, like, it would take me longer to read 2 full pages of the book than to just get through 1 paragraph of his dialogue with certainty that I actually knew what he said. And it's just not good. Like, just make it normal English, please. And then the other main problem that I think I had with the book is the back half is actually really slow. Like, once you've started to get into the drama and the way that the family interactions and stuff like that's going on, it's really engaging for a couple thirds of the story. But once you get to that last third, it starts to feel really samey and really slow, and it starts to drag because it's just the same thing over and over. This book is, I think my copy is like 340 pages, and realistically, you could have cut out probably 50 pages worth of the story and just cut down on some of the specifics of the drama and whatnot that was happening and not lost a whole lot of the story. Because like I said, that last third really starts to drag because it just starts to feel the same as everything that came before it. Even though it starts off really engaging and it's written really well, you just decide at one point, it's like, okay, can we move on to something else, please, for a split second? And it just never happens. But the thing that I was definitely most disappointed with, beyond just the fact that the last third was a little bit slower than the first 2/3 of it, is that there was a specific supernatural aspect to the book that occurred in like chapter 2 or 3 or something like that. That was amazing, fantastic scene. Absolutely love it. One of my favorite moments of anything that I've read so far this year. Like, it was actually really cool and interesting. And then it was just completely abandoned. Never shows up again until the very end of the book. Like, legitimately. This quasi supernatural element of the book happens. This encounter happens in like chapter 3 or whenever it is. And then it's like brought up briefly in one heated discussion, sort of in the back third. And then it's brought up a couple more times as sort of like a resolution type of thing in the last chapter or two. And those were all great. I really liked when that happened. But the problem is it didn't have a place in the story otherwise. Like, the problem is it didn't do enough with it. If it was going to have this supernatural-esque element in it, even if it wasn't supernatural per se, even if it could have just been chalked down to an aspect of insanity, because I suppose if you read it a certain way, you could absolutely assume it's just insanity and not anything else. Even so, Emily Brontë should have definitely chosen whether it was going to be in the story or not, because the way that it exists in the story is super disappointing because it's not in there enough and it doesn't do anything, essentially. Like, you base off the way it's promised in chapter 3, you're like, this is going to do something in the story, and then it just never does. You could argue that it does and that it's just not on page, but the point is that I wanted it on the page, so I think it should have been in there more. And it actually would have made Heathcliff's character specifically a lot more interesting. It would have made certain aspects to some of his actions at various different points of the story a lot more interesting and intriguing and less, less cyclical and less normal and less repetitive, I suppose, as it would have been if Brontë just decided to include the element more often, actually have it have a place in the story rather than just brief mentions and a random encounter at the beginning of the story. So I was really disappointed with that, and I was honestly quite salty about it. It was the reason that I rated the book 4 stars instead of 5, and is the primary reason why it's just not 5 stars in general, why it's not a favorite of mine. Like, generally speaking, I just wanted to see more ghosts and stuff. Like, I that's all I wanted. Like, that's what I wanted to see more of, was just that one particular thing, and if it was in there even just a few more times, it would have been better. This book was shaping up to be a favorite of mine. It was shaping up to be perfect, but then the last third was really slow, and the supernatural stuff never came back again in any meaningful aspect. So it really disappointed me. The ugly of Wuthering Heights is that this book paints character interactions and relationships horrifically, and not like horrifically as if she did a bad job of depicting them, but horrifically because you realize that stuff like that is 100% believable. Like, you can totally see that stuff happening, even if it's not like common, depending on where or when you grew up. But yeah, that definitely happens in the book. The recommendation of Wuthering Heights is, it's hard for me because even thinking back on it, I still really loved the book. Like, I genuinely did, even if I have some of those issues with it. And even if this review sounds really disparaging, like, this review probably sounds a lot more negative than I mean for it to. I'm mostly just salty, and like I said, I've soured a bit more on it over time than I think I otherwise would have. But if you are somebody who is a fan of Gothic fiction, especially where the tone is concerned, definitely check out this book. If not, I think it's just boring enough in the last third of the book, especially, and disappointing enough in that one specific element, if you decide that's the element you want to see more of, that if you don't want to read it, or if you have heard other people, that you trust the recommendations of, not recommend it, or if you tend to share a lot of opinions with a particular other reviewer or something, and they did not like this book, then I would say you're fine skipping this one. Unfortunately, because I did enjoy it and I wanted to love it a lot more, and it could have been a favorite. Like, it could have been one of my favorite books of all time, and it was very close to it. But it is a very difficult book to recommend, and even the Goodreads ratings, kind of agree with me, because, looking for Goodreads star rating average is not the best way to determine whether a book is actually good or not, because a lot of books have overinflated ratings. And then there are some books that are just really underrated in general. But this book is one that is very middle of the road. Even with well over 1 million reviews, it's only like 3.5 star, maybe even less than that in terms of the average. And yeah, it makes sense. And like I said at the beginning of this video, whether people rated it low or disliked it because they were forced to read it, like say in high school or something related to that, or because they just genuinely did not like it, even if they tried to like it, I can totally see why it has such a low score. I do not recommend this book generally. Like, I'm not just going to say, yes, people should read this book. If you enjoy Gothic fiction, give it a shot. 100%. It definitely deserves its place there, but it's not the best book in the world. I'm definitely keen to check out some of Emily Bronte's poems, since she did not write any other books, which is unfortunate because I think, given the time in her life to be able to write another book, it could have been a masterpiece, and this was almost a masterpiece for a while. But I'm keen to check out her poetry, but I think this is one that's definitely like, yeah, you as a general reader probably don't need to read it. Like, it's not one that I'm just going to broadly recommend to people. If you want to read it, give it a shot. If you don't want to read it, I don't think you're necessarily missing a whole lot, to be brutally honest, unfortunately. If you have read it, if you're watching this and you just wanted to see what I thought about it, and you have already read it before, let me know what you thought of it. The main thing is, this was one of those books that even though I enjoyed it quite a bit and I wanted to enjoy it a bit more, it's not even like the Bird book per se, like The Obscene Bird of Night by Jose Donoso. That's a book that someday I see myself rereading it to see if I can appreciate more about it, to see if I can get more of the themes and sort of the subtext to it, to see if there's more for me to enjoy about that book. So even though I didn't really like it, and in fact, in almost all ways except for part 1 of the book, I disliked it. I just straight up disliked it. I still see myself rereading it, absolutely. This is one where even though I enjoyed it, and especially because I wanted to enjoy it more, I could and probably should reread it in the future to see if I feel different about it. But the thing is, I'm so solid on those opinions based off of the way that it just gets slow in the last third, and because I know how the element that I wanted to see the most of is handled in the book, I don't think I'm ever going to reread Wuthering Heights. I do not think this will be a book that I ever have the desire to reread. It's definitely one of those once and never again types books for me, unlike most of the classics I've read. But that is going to be the end of this review. Thank you guys for watching. Next Tuesday, you'll have another review. This one's going to be a lot different. It's going to be on The Underland Chronicles by Suzanne Collins, so the full series about it. It's going to be a full ranking and review, kind of the way that I've done Rick Riordan stuff in the past. I don't think that video is going to be very popular. That's fine. I'm still going to do it anyway, but that will be releasing next week. If you've been following my Wheel of Time stuff, another diary will be coming out on Thursday, just like normal. But with all that being said, that is the end of this video. Thank you guys for watching. I'll be back again next week.